Welcome back. Got another wonderful episode this week. We talked about safety last week, and now you're like, okay, time is here. We're jumping into that very first date. So what do we need to do before we panic? We're going to give you some tips and suggestions on how to have a successful, so that you survive and thrive through this first date.
I am so excited. We got the necessity talked about last week. We talked about safety, and now we really get to dive into the fun. And I know that this part, although it is fun, especially when it's new and exciting, can sometimes be a little bit nerve-wracking and be one of the harder steps to take when you're going out on that date. It's real easy to hide behind a screen, but now it's ride or die time, and you actually have to step outside your front door. So how do you prepare, and how do you go out and do that and just make sure that you have fun? Because ultimately that's what this is about, is having fun and enjoying your life.
Absolutely, because the end goal is not for this to be something that makes you sick, makes you lose sleep over. We really want you to go out there and have as many fun first dates as you possibly can.
So I don't know about you, but I've had a lot of really fun first dates that have not turned into second dates or not turned into future dates. And some of those people ended up being friends. Some of them didn't. But really the point was that I just went out and I had fun. We've done walks. I've gone out and we've done here in Sioux Falls, done the sculpture walk on a first date. That was a lot of fun. Just some place where you can get to know people. But remember that we're in the process of going out and doing something enjoyable, and we're having a good time, and it's just about enjoying the company that you're with. And if it leads to a second date, that's great. Even if your end goal is marriage or that serious relationship, the first date is all about just having fun and seeing if your energies mesh.
Yes. So obviously, before we get into all the fun stuff, we want to talk a little bit about managing our expectations going into this first date, because you can have that really great text chemistry. And if you're anything like me, then all of a sudden the brain starts going into like, oh, wouldn't it be awesome if we could do blank in 6 months? And all of this stuff starts to bubble in your head. Or maybe you go the other way. What if this is a complete disaster? What if we don't have anything to talk about? It can be kind of both ends of the spectrum when you start to have that like overthinking when it comes to that first date. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we can kind of breathe, first of all, get that mindset right, so that we approach these first dates with a mindset and with expectations that we do truly end up having a great time with this new person that we're meeting.
Right. And so maybe I jumped the gun just a little bit there, talking about the expectation and making sure that you're setting that right expectation of just having fun on a first date. And I think that's, again, I'm just going to go back to it, really important to remember that you're probably not going to get married after a first date. 99.999% of the time, you are not going to get married after the first date. It may or may not lead to a second date. So just take a deep breath, let it out, and remember that there's no pressure. There is no pressure for you to impress anyone. You're wanting to put your best foot forward, but there is no pressure for you to go out there and be inauthentic or be somebody that you're not in order to impress somebody. They're going to like you for who you are, or they're not going to like you. And that's okay, right? There's millions of people on the planet, and this is one person. And if this isn't the love of your life, that's okay. So remembering to manage that expectation and go out there with an intention of just having fun.
Because I've had people tell me, we're like, if you just go, whatever mindset you're going into that date with is kind of what you're going to get out of the date. So if you go in thinking like, well, this isn't going to be a ton of fun, or you go in thinking, what if he doesn't like me, and all of these what ifs, then it kind of takes away from like being in the moment, being in that experience. So just knowing that, hey, maybe it's just an hour. I can do this for an hour or 30 minutes, whatever the kind of date time is. It's just like a sliver of your day. And so wouldn't you want to approach it to have as much fun as you possibly can. Or maybe it's just, I just want to have a time that's not terrible. Sometimes that's how we have to manage it too. But hopefully you can kind of approach this with like, how much fun can I have with this new person?
And I also want to say, the more you practice, right? We're talking about just diving into that dating world. You are just getting started. And the more you practice something, the better you get.
Mm-hmm.
You're not expected to be good at something the first time that you do it. Remember when you were learning to ride a bike, how many times did you fall over? I fell over a lot, or at least a few times, right? Before you were able to get up on that bike, and you just got back up. So if you get a few bad dates under your belt, those are growing pains, a learning experience, and that's okay too. You don't have to expect a bad date, but going in there with the knowledge that if it doesn't work out the way that you wanted to, you can just go, oh, well, on to the next. I'm going to try again.
Yes. All wonderful advice, because, hey, the worst you get out of it is a fun story to tell at parties. Sometimes that's the way you look at it. I have a couple of those dates that I've, they weren't the greatest, but they're a great anecdote when you're trying to talk to somebody at a networking event or trying to get to know somebody else. Sometimes it's kind of fun to have those in your back pocket to show that we're all human. We all have those experiences that don't go quite the way we had hoped.
Right. I remember one time I went out on a date with a guy, and I had met him online, and this was a while back, and I had met him online, and I met him in a public place. We went out for dinner, and I walk in, and I don't know if you remember George Costanza on Seinfeld. That's who this guy was. 100%. He was short, he was bald, he was George Costanza from Seinfeld, facial features, everything. And that really wasn't what I was attracted to. Maybe somebody is, but it wasn't what I was attracted to. And I took a deep breath and I said, okay, let's see where this goes. Let's have fun. I can grin and bear anything, and I can make the best of it, and I can have some fun. I'll probably get into stories later that tell you how that guy ended up as a restraining order. The first date didn't end up being that bad. We actually did have a decent time.
Okay, well, we are at some point going to have a dating disasters episode, so you want to make sure to stay tuned for that. But we're going to move on to something hopefully a little bit more pleasant to talk about, and that is,
we'll talk about how to prepare. So we talked about those expectations and what to do, but how do you get ready to step foot out that door, and how do you prepare for that first date? So we talked about those safety tips last week, and I think one that we missed talking about was, don't let them come to your home to pick you up. Right. Sometimes, right? That's an old-fashioned idea, and that is still an idea sometimes, and still romanticized, and there's nothing wrong with it after you get to know somebody. But if you're really wanting to be safety conscious and you're really nervous about being safe on that first date, meet them there. So have a plan, figure out what you're doing, and know where you're going to meet somebody and what that date is going to look like.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up, because it was one that kind of we mentioned, but it is a really important thing. And again, it's kind of on that same line. If you don't want them to know what your car is, grab an Uber or a Lyft and meet somebody there. If you're, if you're feeling like you want to be super safe and cautious, making sure
remember, most people are good.
Right. Hopefully they're on a date with somebody who is one of the good guys or good people. So we're not going to have to worry too much about that. But as you're preparing for the date, Angie, what were some of your favorite things when you're getting ready and preparing for a date that you want to do, or maybe you think are good ideas for other people to do?
So number one is knowing that I have a plan, whether that is knowing where we're going, what we're doing, and how long we can expect to be on a date, or whether that is having that check-in an hour in case I need an out. Just preparing and understand. And then once you know what you're doing for a date, dressing accordingly. If you're going to go for a hike, you don't want to wear high heels, right? And not that you would go hiking on your first date, but if you're going to go walk around the park, right? If you're going to go for a long walk downtown, or if you're going to go do something like what we have here in Sioux Falls, like the sculpture walk, or you're going to be window shopping or whatever, we'll get into different first date ideas here in a little bit. But if you're going to be doing something like that, you may not want to wear a pair of 5-inch heels. You may want to wear something more practical. So the first step in preparing for a date is dressing accordingly.
And a big thing that I kind of always used to do, I do still now, is I have like a couple of like go-to date outfits, kind of depending on for various things that you might do, but they're all things that I feel really good in and I feel really confident in. So dressing, yeah, appropriate to the activity you're going to do, but try to find things that make you feel amazing, that make you feel confident, because that is going to be way more attractive than anything really you could put on. Is that when you feel so yourself and you walk in, whether it can be a bold kind of lipstick, if that's what you want to do, it doesn't necessarily have to be everything about what you wear, but finding something that really, feels like you, so that you feel really confident walking into that first date.
I love that reminder, because you are so right. You want to feel good in your skin and in your clothing. So when you are wearing something that you feel confident in, it just changes your whole energy about who you are and what you're doing. So even if you're nervous, you're still releasing or exuding an energy that says something very positive about yourself.
Yes.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
And then my other idea for preparing, or what I do when I'm preparing, is I always have a backup plan for a date. So even if you're not the one preparing for the date, or even if you're not the one planning the date and what you're going to go do, have an idea of a backup plan. So let's say that you are going to go for a walk out in the park and it rains. Don't rely on the other person to have that backup plan. Participate and be an active participant, and know what you want to go do and what an alternative is that you can go spend your time doing, so that you're not trying to come up with it last minute. And this way you also know that you get some input and can do something that you're going to enjoy.
Yes, because that's a great idea. You never know that the restaurant may be closed or the bar is at capacity and you don't really want to sit somewhere crowded. So the planner in me likes the idea of having, whether you use the idea or not, just having those backup plans where you don't spend then 20 minutes of your date trying to figure out what you're going to do next. And it turns into this battle of, I don't care. What do you want to do? Well, it doesn't matter to me. What do you want to do? And then until you just want to pull your hair out. So having maybe a couple of suggestions that you can throw out, and whether they veto them or not, you can be like, at least I'm contributing to the change in plans. And if they don't, and kind of just keep pushing back, sometimes you get information when things go wrong as to how your date handles that kind of stuff as well.
Not failure, feedback. But yeah, there's nothing saying that you can't have the same date plan for any of your first dates. So right, this might be a little bit of extra work in the very beginning before you go on your first date. But once you have those handful of things, they can always be a backup. So this is one of those exercises where it's do it once and it may pay dividends down the road and you can just keep relying on it. But having that plan to execute against makes things so much easier.
Yes. I like that reminder, because you don't have to reinvent the wheel every single time. Hopefully it's a new person you're on a first date with, so they're not going to know that you gave all these suggestions at the last first date. So you'll be fine.
Or maybe it's the same person that you're going on a second or third date with, and you can still pull these ideas out of your pocket because there's still things that you want to do and have fun.
Sure. Excellent point. Yes.
Either way, they are useful, but it is something that you can use over and over again.
Absolutely. Yep.
And so that kind of leads us into, well, what can you do, or what can you do on those dates to plan, or what kind of dates can you plan? What kind of activities can you do in order to make sure that you're prepared, or in order to just have a successful first date if you are the one planning it from the beginning and you're not looking at it from a backup plan perspective?
I think there, there's a lot of things that, are fairly straightforward, like meeting for coffee, meeting for a drink, something that, is maybe a minimal time commitment, just kind of enough to get to know them. Then if you want to extend it, those are the ones that are easily extendable, like coffee can turn into lunch, drinks can turn into dinner. So it's all of those kind of things that maybe if you just want to see if you're a good fit and then have that potential to expand, those are always kind of a nice classics to kind of be your go-to.
I like the idea of that too, that you can expand those dates. But if you're not really sure on something or don't want to commit to a longer time frame, I also like how short those can be. I mean, coffee can be as little as 15 minutes just to say, hi, hey, I don't have a lot of time. And a lot of times, we were talking a couple of weeks ago, Lisa, where you have a 1 week and you should be able to figure out how to make something work in a week. Well, a lot of times we book our weeks out and we're busy. And if you have a block schedule and you're a busy person running to and from, 15 minutes is still just enough time for a meet and greet and see somebody face to face and squeeze that in. So having that in your back pocket always for drinks or for a quick cup of coffee to say hi and get that first introduction done, I think that's a great option just to keep open.
Yes. Yes. And then, like we've been kind of preaching a little bit here, Google is your best friend. Don't hesitate to Google happenings in your city. Maybe there's some art festival or some fun film or something that maybe is outside of your normal scope of what you might do on a first date that might be a little bit interesting. That might be something kind of different, that if you're looking for something besides drinks and coffee, that might be interesting to both you and your date.
Sure. I know here in Sioux Falls, some things that come up that aren't typical would be the sculpture walk downtown. So maybe your town or city has some sort of art center that is free outdoors and public where you can go walk around. We also have movies in the park on Saturday nights in the summertime. And that is a fun, unusual activity where you're sitting outside in the park watching a movie. I don't know do you remember what movie that was on where they did that? He said it's the most unusual first date that he's ever been on. It's a great movie.
And I'm sure everybody listening is now screaming what that movie is. And why don't you ladies remember that? So let us know so that we can remember what it was.
Right. Drop it below, drop it, send us a comment, an email, whatever, because now I'm going to go crazy thinking about it. But that's always a fun one too. And I think a lot of cities or towns have that, but just those unique things that you wouldn't normally think of, like you said, Lisa, Google is a great resource for that.
Maybe you've got your favorite deli, meet for a picnic. If you want to get outside and maybe you're not in the mood to take a walk, but maybe there's a fun park in your town that has something fun to see, you can always go on a picnic. So again, this is not necessarily about trying to stick to exact ones, but let yourself kind of get creative, think outside the box. And again, if there's something that you've been wanting to do, that might be a great idea to suggest for a first date.
Right. And you could do, let's say that you're a sporty person. We've been talking about some good standards across the board, but if you're active and you're sporty, you could go bowling, you could go skating, you could go to a sporting event. If you're a theater person, you could go to a play, you could go to a movie, you could go to something going on in the park. There's a lot of different things that you can do that suit different personality types. If you just go out there and explore and get creative, let those creative juices flow, make that list, keep notes in a jar, something like that. But if you have that list, you can refer back to it over and over again. And not only that, but you can add some adventure to your life just by default.
Exactly. Who doesn't want a little bit more adventure?
Exactly. We all want more adventure.
So we figured out what we're doing. We know what we're going to wear. Now we're actually on the said date. So probably for, at least for me, and maybe a lot of people out there, the most nerve-wracking part is what are we going to talk about?
So first and foremost, I would advise all of you to make a list. Make a list of questions. And when you're making that list of questions, keep in mind two things. One is it's about the other person. You're getting to know them. It's their job to get to know you, but it's not your job to force yourself on them. It's your job to get to know them. It is a partnership. And so giving to the other person, and when you put that focus on the other person, you're taking the focus off of yourself and you're relieving some of your nerves. So when you're making your list, remember that you're focusing on getting to know the other person. And the second thing is that this list should be conversation topics. So you want something that's more than yes or no answers. You want questions that are going to give you an answer that you can talk about and have a conversation around and find those commonalities. So if you're asking somebody about the last trip that they've been on, and they start, if you love to travel and they start telling you about another state that they went to or another country that they went to or this awesome adventure that they have, you can ask them more about that and you can get really interested in what they have to say because it's something that you're interested in and it's a topic that you understand.
Exactly. And again, here's where like the list is not a bad thing because we all have those moments where we've lost all thought in our head and don't know what to say next. And so start a running list of like, say you heard a question asked by somebody, you're like, oh, I want to remember that. Or those conversation topics. One that I really like to ask on first dates is like, if you had 3 wishes, what would those 3 wishes be? Because that's a great one to kind of get to know like interesting parts of that person. What's the last book that you've read? What's your favorite cereal? Sometimes the more bizarre that you kind of put out there, that kind of throws it off, makes it feel a little bit light and not so much like a job interview, because I've been on dates where it kind of felt like I was interviewing them because that was about as much feedback as I was getting. And to that point, I always try to give my dates a little bit of grace, a little bit of wiggle room, because it's that first date. We're just meeting, everybody's got nerves. So I understand that sometimes that conversation can be a little bit stilted, but kind of keeping that in mind, if they're really okay answering all the questions, but they're not giving anything back, it's just more feedback that I kind of put in the back burner, filing that away for later, because if this is going to become a habit, if it feels like I am always the one putting forth this energy, then this is not going to be an aligned thing. So using that information, yes, to get to know them, but also as kind of a way to see, are we kind of a fit? Do we have like styles of communicating? Is he really as interested in me as I seem to be interested in him? So just something to kind of consider and keep on the brain there.
Right. And later we'll get into, I guess, what you would call bantering and talking back and forth and keeping a conversation going and kind of going from asking a question to into a conversation to kind of leading to that next question. We'll get into that and talk about that in the future. And that is something that can be used in a lot of areas of your life. But just to start with, I think those questions are great to have in your back pocket. And I love the idea of taking that feedback and really paying attention to kind of what you're getting back from the other person too.
Because don't be afraid, and I have done this, I've made notes after I've gotten back from a date. The nerd in me, I just outed myself here. But there are times, especially if you're dating pretty prolifically, if you're kind of out there, putting yourself out there, having a lot of first dates, sometimes it can be confusing as to what we talked about with who. Don't want to sound like we've got so many dates, you can't keep them straight. But sometimes, even if you're like doing a couple of dates in a week, it can be confusing as to who kind of did what. So sometimes first impressions, thoughts, ideas, things that you came away from the date with. Don't be afraid to start like a dating journal to start to keep track of some of this stuff, because not only does it maybe tell you about your date, but I think you're going to find it's going to tell you more about you and what you eventually are going to start to want, what you're looking for, maybe start to refine some of that. So don't be afraid to kind of like keep some notes on that. If that's your thing. If it's not, then feel fully free to skip that one. We should probably also kind of touch on the maybe like don't topics, or maybe with caution, proceed with caution if you're going to bring up those particular topics. Not that you can't talk about anything and everything under the sun, but some topics of conversation are going to require a little bit of nuance and maybe a little bit of careful maneuvering.
True. And it doesn't mean you can't ever talk about them.
Right.
It doesn't mean that doesn't come up as you get to know somebody. But on your first date, again, going back to managing those expectations, your first date is meant to be fun and just to see if there is any type of mutual interest to have a second date. So while you want to be yourself, while you want to be authentically you, you also want to put your best foot forward, right? You want to present your best self, but you want to present yourself. So topics to avoid might be a long-term 5-year plan where you take your date's last name or something along those lines. Maybe avoiding marriage just for a little while might be a good idea to avoid. Other topics, a little bit more commonly talked about as topics to avoid: politics and religion. While those might be important in a life partner, they are probably not ideal topics for a first date, especially if you have a lot of strong emotions that relate to either one of those topics. But even if you don't know if the person you're on a date with does, and it's not going to do anybody any favors to get into an argument over that before you even give yourself a chance to get to know whether or not you like their personality.
Right. Yes. So I think it's, again, back to that kind of managing expectations. Like, would this be a fun topic to bring up right now? Not probably. But again, this is not to say that you shouldn't be having these conversations at some point. But again, this is a first date. It really is trying to figure out what's your favorite color, what kind of, sometimes it's just kind of about the basics. So, maybe saving some of those little bit more involved, in depth, like you said, emotional conversations and topics for when you've gotten to know each other a little better.
Right. And so, Lisa, what do we do when the date is over and we are saying goodnight and we know one way or the other how we're feeling about next steps in this relationship?
So I will answer that question, but I want to kind of like put this disclaimer here because I think we need to talk about this. First of all, you don't owe anybody any kind of like physical touch, whether that's a hug, a handshake, a kiss, anything like that. If all you want to do is like wave or high five, you are perfectly within your rights. So kind of then part of your managing expectations is knowing, am I going to want to hug this person? Am I going to want to maybe give them a peck goodnight? All within your rights to say no to any of that. So that's part of how we kind of wrap up the date as well, is, being clear on what our boundaries are when it comes to like physical touch. Here is where that communication is kind really comes in. If you're not comfortable, not all of us are comfortable saying face to face, hey, I had a really good time. This is not for me. I get it. But I think it can be something as simple of, you know what, I had a wonderful time tonight. Let's catch up later this week. Or I will text you in the next couple of days. We can kind of follow up then, because sometimes you need a moment or two to collect your thoughts. Maybe it wasn't like 100%, this is awesome, I want a second date, but maybe it wasn't 100%, no, I don't want this date. So maybe giving yourself some time to process and to think about the date, but eventually being honest about where you fall into, yes, I want to have a second date. No, I don't. You need to communicate that one way or the other to that other person.
Great advice. I love that. Not just ghosting somebody. Right. I've done that. I did that, and thank goodness he and I are now friends. But it was one of those things where he was very persistent in following up, and I just kept ignoring him because it was before I was comfortable saying thanks, but no thanks. And eventually I did apologize. I said, I'm really sorry that I ghosted you. That was really inappropriate. I just don't think that you're the right person for me. He came back and he said, that's fine. Let's be friends. And I said, okay, let's be friends. And we are friends. But it was very rude of me to do the ghosting. So no judgment if you've done it before, if if you're in the process of ghosting somebody now, no judgment, but clear is kind, communication is kind. Go ahead and just let them know. Say, hey, you know what? I had a really good time, but I don't think this is for me. or you're a really nice person, but I don't think this is for me. Because I've also been on the other end of the ghosting, where you think that things are going well. You think that, you might have seen somebody 3 or 4 times and suddenly they just stop responding back to you and stop communicating. And I would much rather be told, hey, I don't think this is going to work out. I had a really nice time, nothing personal, but it's just not for me. That would have helped me move on rather than wonder what I did wrong.
Right. And I think that's a good point. Everybody would much rather hear that it's not a fit, so that I don't keep wondering either one, what I did wrong, or why aren't they responding to me? I thought things were really well, because I can't read the other person's mind and you can't either. So being very clear with that. The other part I want to be mention is that I was very clear with somebody that I wasn't interested in going forward. He keeps messaging me. Then you have full permission to stop responding to people. But we need to have that first initial contact of being like, this is not for me. Thanks for your time. I wish you the best of luck. And then you're free. Then you can continue to ignore all you want. But we need to have that initial clarity of, this is not a thing for me, and letting everybody go their own separate way.
Right. And I think that's a good reminder as we close this. Would like to close on a positive note, so we'll come back around to that. But Lisa, like you were saying, that's one of the reasons. He's probably a decent guy, probably a nice guy, right? But the fact that he won't stop messaging you, that's where those safety measures come in that we had talked about, where you want to make sure that you're not inviting them over to your house, because it would be awful to have somebody like that showing up on your doorstep, knocking on your door because you're not answering them after you told them very clearly and kindly that this is not for you.
Right. So, and I think overall, like 90% of like my first dates have gone really well. And whether it went on to a second date or not, it was always like fun stepping outside of my comfort zone for just a little bit. It was fun pushing myself to doing something new, to trying something new, to meeting that new person, because sometimes you don't know if that one date that wasn't for you doesn't connect you with somebody else who might down the line be somebody you have a friendship with or a relationship with. So I think it's trying to stay as positive as you can in those experiences, just because, like you said, you don't know when they turn into a friend. You don't know when they might introduce you to somebody who might be a long-term relationship, or even ended up being like a husband or a wife. So trying as best you can and within reason to end things on a positive note, and to kind of keep people knowing that you respect them and their time. They'll respect, hopefully, you and your time.
So on that, congratulations. You have survived your first date, and hopefully these tips will help you to have thrived and have a lot of fun rather than wind up on that first date as a nervous wreck.
So tell us all about how your first date went, where you went, what you talked about. We want to know all of the details so that we have ideas for next time, or at least I have ideas for next time. And if you had some stories that maybe didn't go so well, always hit us up at our email, soyourereadytodate@gmail.com, because we are at some point going to talk about dating disasters.
And we would love to share your stories too.
Yes. So that everybody can feel like we're all in the same boat in this together.
Exactly. And until next time, have a wonderful week.
Thanks, guys.